Hello, and welcome to Amara Woman Magazine. I'm your host, Wendy Brawley. We've got a little different show for you today, but one that I'm sure you'll enjoy. We're going to be talking about a very hot topic in the news, critical race theory. So, stay where you are. Amara Woman Magazine starts now. Well, welcome back. I am just delighted to have with us Dr. Gloria Boutte. Hey, Gloria.
Hey, Wendy.
And Dr. Jamil Johnson.
Hello.
Thank you both for coming and being a part of our show today. We have got some questions for you guys. But before I get started, I want to make sure I get your titles correct. So, Gloria, can you tell us what that title is?
Okay, well, I am Dr. Gloria Boutte. I am the Interim Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of South Carolina, and I'm also a Carolina Distinguished Professor.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Johnson?
Yes, my name is Dr. Jamil Johnson. I'm a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policies at the University of South Carolina.
My alma mater. Well, thank you, and Jessica. It's just good to have this kind of expertise at our table. So thank you both for coming. We've been kind of talking a little bit about critical race theory. As you know, it is a very controversial topic. We kind of think that a lot of people may not really know or understand what it really is. So I'm going to just start by asking one of you or both of you to give us a definition of what critical race theory is. It's short called what, CRT?
Yes.
And we hear that often, and sometimes it drives people crazy and it causes all kind of emotion. But what really is CRT or critical race theory?
Yeah, so I'll start us off. So critical race theory is really a legal theory that was founded in the 1970s and 1980s by legal scholars, Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and many other scholars who really wanted to create a theoretical framework or a theory that highlighted the narratives, particularly of people of color. And so when we think about critical race theory, it's really on the surface, it's really about giving voice to populations who have been silenced. Silenced by their history, their lived histories, and it's not necessarily the history that they're experiencing right now, it's the history of where they are from. Their cultural background, their social, cultural, historical, etc., environmental background. And so that's really at its roots, that's really what critical race theory is about. It's about highlighting those important counter narratives of success, those narratives of people who have been told we don't want to hear about your true narrative. Or even when we think about what we learn in textbooks, we often understand that textbooks don't tell the whole history of a person or a culture. It's really about expanding upon that and ensuring that the whole history is told. So at the foundation, that's really what critical race theory is about. There is this myth also that critical race theory, is being taught in K through 12. But again, at its foundation, understand that it was founded as a legal theory. And so you will see this taught in law classes to really understand the history of legality, but also the history of various different populations of people. Overwhelmingly, critical race theory is taught at the graduate level. It's a theory that is applied when we talk about, again, giving narrative to populations. And so it's about allowing people to share their voice in their lived histories. And so it's overwhelmingly taught at the graduate level. Not to say it could not be taught at other levels, but it is overwhelmingly taught at the graduate level.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I would co-narrate just that it started in legal studies, and one of the reasons was because Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and others noticed that racism was codified in the laws. So it was a way to identify how systemic inequities sort of were embedded in the legal system and to point those out. I will also say that, like in the College of Education here at USC, we do have a course, we have 2 courses on critical race theory. So it started in the legal studies, but it's been widely applied to lots of different fields, including education and political science and other fields as well. It's a way to look at systemic inequities, and by that I mean in terms of looking at the way policies and laws are in place that are not fair to everyone. So really at its root, it's about fairness and voice of people who have not been heard. And you can think about it as a way of democratizing society to make it equal so all voices are heard.
That's interesting.
Dr. Boutte, why do you think CRT is a threat to some people?
Yeah, I think it's a threat because there are many people who do not want to democratize education, who do not want to look at the voices of people from many different backgrounds, particularly people of color. If we were to do a content analysis from preschool all the way up to the university level, we would find that 80% or higher of that content actually centers the stories of white people, of European people, and so forth. And so there are people out there who want to continue that, who don't want, and that is really not the essence of what this country is about. This country is about, really, when we say democratize, it means including the voices of all people.
Yeah.
So really, these movements against critical race theory, of course, they have been manufactured to be something that is not real. But at the same time, they're trying to keep out the voices of people of color. When I'm going to give you an example. When my granddaughter was 4 years old, maybe she was 4 or 5, she brought home a library book that was called A Mom Like No Other. It was about a black mom and child. And after I read that to her, she said, I like this book because it seems real. That was very painful to me, because what she was also not saying was everything else I had up to this point was not real, did not relate to me. And we know that when children are engaged, they're engaged deeply when the books can relate to them, right? And so, by the way, that was a library book. That was not a book that was part of the regular curriculum. She had been in school about 3 years at that time. So, efforts to include the voices, include materials, include content in a central way, not an add-on. That's really what the pushback is about. And there is another agenda on the table that people don't talk about, and that agenda is to undermine public schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk a lot about that.
Okay, so yeah.
We're going to talk a lot about that in our next segment, so I want y'all to stick around for that. It's interesting that you relate this to the cultural aspect, because as we all know, much of our culture was taken away historically, and now that we are trying to reclaim it, at least for the sake of educating not only our kids and generations, but everyone, because America is a huge melting pot of people, and it's important that everyone has some connection to where they are and where they came from. This is just fascinating to me, but I have to ask, what can we do to kind of quell some of this misinformation about CRT, critical race theory?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things to do is to be educated about what critical race theory actually is.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of misinformation about what CRT is. And unfortunately, a lot of it is guided by what we see in the media, in social media, which is not correct information. So the best way to be educated about critical race theory is to look at the scholarship, look at what has been published about critical race theory from experts who are experts in the field on critical race theory, because they're the ones who really have the knowledge, and then utilize that to really understand what the framework is and how it's being applied and what it truly means for people of color, for all people, and giving voice to people who have often been silenced.
Well, I'll have to take a quick break, but I'm going to ask, can y'all stick around a little bit? I appreciate that. We've got an educator joining us in the next segment that I want to hear her voice as to how this topic is actually hitting the classrooms of South Carolina. So listen, y'all stay with us. We will be right back.
Hey world, I have a quick message. It's about safe driving. Alright, let's go. Anytime you're driving, have the seatbelt buckled tight. Both hands on the wheel and your phone out of sight. When not in your hand trying to text somebody back. Because if you do, your car might get smacked. The moral of the story, just put your phone down. The people on the road will stay safe and sound. Put your phone down, put your phone down. People on the road will stay safe and sound. Yeah.
Welcome back. I am delighted to have our new guest in with us, Sherry East, who is the president of the South Carolina Education Association. Sherry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Wendy. It's always a pleasure.
This is a hot topic, and we've been fortunate enough to have both Dr. Johnson and Dr. Boutte still stay with us for this segment. We're talking about CRT, critical race theory, and I think we're going to be talking about that a lot. It's a hot topic across this country, and sadly, it has become the fixation of many in South Carolina. But before I get too far in the weeds, I just have to ask you the critical question, Sherry, since you were with the Education Association. Is CRT taught in the K-12 curriculum in South Carolina?
No, Wendy, it's not part of the South Carolina approved standards. So all of this rhetoric and all of this commotion we heard last legislative session about what are we doing, we're brainwashing children, and all of this rhetoric that went on was really, I felt, politically energized by the national groups and national media that were out there trying to just really stir up people for whatever reason. And it did stir up a lot of emotions and anger, and it really put a lot of pressure on teachers, and it made them scared. You know, they were afraid because there's really a very loose definition of CRT at that point. I heard earlier the official definition of CRT, but it, you know, I had teachers calling saying, can I read a book about Martin Luther King Jr. to my second graders during February? Can I do this? Can I do that? Am I going to get in trouble if I'm talking about the factual history of South Carolina? And they really went down a rabbit hole with, you know, the legislature. So I think teachers are very frustrated, they're worried. But no, in South Carolina, there are South Carolina approved standards. If anyone wants to see what they are, they can go online and review them. So, and if you want to be part of that process and you want to see, and anytime, I think ELA standards are up right now for elementary school. They're revising the English standards. It's an open process. We would encourage parents to get involved in that, to actually see what your children are learning. Or how about you have a conversation with your teacher, with your child's teacher, before you go blast somebody on social media for something that didn't happen in our schools here in South Carolina.
Well, I think, you know, that is a critical point. And I think you all were addressing that in our previous segment about the level that this is even addressed at all in academia. Is at the college, it was the law school level initially, and you may have a sprinkling of it in the college environment. But I mean, so that begs another question, and I know you wanted to make a comment on one of the points that were made earlier before I move on.
I did. You had asked the question, what should people do in essence, and I like what Dr. Johnson said, is educate themselves, but I want to say that people should take this seriously.
Yeah.
And understand the repercussions. Not only are teachers leaving, but in terms of denying accurate, complete historical accounts, that's at risk. And so in terms of concrete things as well, I strongly recommend that people reach out to their legislators, people in the House of Representatives, on the education committees, people who are on the Senate committees. Let them know that their voices count. They need to show up at school board meetings where these conversations are happening, because what's happening is the people who really want to keep our democracy intact are not there at the table.
Well, thank you for that. And there's just so many different nuances to this that I don't know that even this program is going to cover everything that we want to talk about. But I think this always goes back to one topic, and that's racism. And there is a distinction between racism and race. So I want to ask the first question of everyone. What, if anything, is being taught in schools about racism in America? Is that a loaded question?
You know, I don't know all of the standards, but I would imagine that it is actually part of not only South Carolina standards in social studies, but nationally as well. I mean, I'm sure there's some discussion on what it is that children are learning, which they really should learn. Because I would think that most people would want to fight against racism. It is not about the individual level, pointing out individual people. It's again looking at what are some ways that life has not been fair in our country, in our local area, to all people. I mean, so, you know, when they learn things about the civil rights movement or the black nationalist movement, I think there's no way around having a conversation about racism. But the purpose is to educate people so we don't repeat the past.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I certainly I don't disagree with that. I don't know that in reality that that's what happens. I think there's been, and we'll talk about this more, a little bit more in the next segment, but I think there's been a push to isolate race and racism out of the curriculum of education altogether. At the State House, as a legislator, former legislator, I can tell you the concern was it makes people uncomfortable. Well, you think? I mean, it should make you uncomfortable, but it is important knowledge that we need to explore.
Yeah, I think at its root foundation, I think that's logistically why you probably don't see a lot of these conversations is because of that uncomfort level. There's a certain foundation where if something is said or something is read, then it could make people in the room feel very uncomfortable in the space. But that uncomfort is a real emotion because of the lived history that has happened. And so again, if we go back to the silenced populations, that's why that uncomfort level is significant because, again, you're highlighting those silenced individuals. And it could be very well those same people in the room who have been silenced their entire lives. And this, for the first time, could be where they can say, oh my gosh, I'm actually being heard. Or, as Dr. Bolte said, I actually see myself in what we're reading. I actually see myself in what we're watching. So a lot of times in curriculum in particular, if students of color don't see themselves, it's difficult for them to connect themselves to what's being learned because there's a disconnect. And honestly, that's the true beauty of when we talk about critical race theory. It's allowing for individuals, for students to see themselves in what's being learned so that they don't feel silenced.
And I want to say two things just quickly about discomfort. One, and you alluded to this, children of color, by that we mean African American, Latino Americans, Indigenous Americans, Asian Americans, are often uncomfortable. And nobody's speaking of that. So what bothers me about this whole conversation around discomfort, we're really saying that some white children may feel discomfort. But black kids feel uncomfortable for 12 years of school and beyond. So we have to think about this. The second thing I would say about discomfort is discomfort, actually there are learning theories that show that when you're learning something new, there is a level of discomfort. It's called disequilibrium, right? If you want to lose some weight, for example, in order to get to that other, the good side of the part, the outcome you really want, you're going to go through some discomfort. So discomfort has been positioned as something that's not part of the learning curve, and it really is part of learning. But again, children of color are very uncomfortable in school. I just used my example of my granddaughter. This child has been uncomfortable hearing all these books read every year. And who's speaking on behalf of those children?
I wish I could say that, you know, our perspective, particularly as African Americans, will be the perspective that ultimately gets included in the process. I don't know that it will. It's gonna be a tough fight because this whole theory, critical race theory, has already been taken over and made into the quote-unquote boogeyman. And it's going to be very difficult to educate enough people around the real notion that this is really about inclusion. It's not about exclusion, and it's not about making people feel bad. It's about making sure that the accurate history of our country is told. I have to ask this question before we get out of the segment, and we can talk a little bit more about this, Sherry. How's this playing itself out with teachers? I mean, you mentioned that some of them are afraid to teach certain things.
Well, they're very nervous, especially your social studies teachers. I taught high school science. In high school science, I was going to say, not a lot of the social, the history of South Carolina, the racism, all that, doesn't really play into the science standards as much as it does in our social studies classrooms. And so our social studies teachers have really been upset, really worried that they're not going to be able to teach factual history. And they're not going to, part of the legislation was they were going to exclude parts of the 1619 Project, which were part of how slavery began in America.
Yeah.
The arrival of slaves. And how could you teach the history of South Carolina without include the arrival of slaves into the state? So sometimes I'm very glad I don't teach history in South Carolina. It's ugly. South Carolina history is an ugly thing. It can be when you feel pressured to leave part of it out.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to say to our teachers, our educators out there, you have the green thumb, or you have thumbs up to teach the accurate and factual history of this state and of this country without feeling like you are going to be attacked on social media or attacked at the schoolhouse, or that you're going to send children in to make fun. And we've heard stories that parents have asked their children to videotape teachers if they feel like they're going to, crossing a line or this. So it makes teachers very nervous because, you just want to do your job.
Yeah.
Teachers are rule followers. We like a plan. We like to do our job. And we really don't need this divisive behavior that's happening out there that are trying to pit teachers against parents and teachers against the children. And teachers really just want to do their job, and they want to be able to teach factual, actual history that happened. And it's uncomfortable. The history of South Carolina is an uncomfortable thing. But we have to get past that, because I do think it's important that everybody gets to learn about everybody. And so every minute that we take away from being able to teach a lesson to a child is a problem. Every minute I can't teach them something about science is a problem. Every minute I have to chase down a parent trying to convince them that I'm teaching standard A14 today. If you want to chime in, that it's a problem. So I think we've really got to quit with the divisive politics in our state and nation and really get back to what's best for children and our communities and what's good for South Carolina.
Well, listen, this is a great topic. I'm going to ask you to stay for a few more minutes. Dr. Johnson, thank you so very much. Dr. Boutte, thank you so much. I know, but you know what? I got a feeling that I'm going to be asking you to come back. I hope that you're willing to do that, because the legislative session is just getting underway, and I got a feeling, unfortunately, that there will be many, many pieces of legislation to address this created crisis. We're going to take a quick break. Again, thank you both for joining us. Sherry, I'm going to ask you to stay a few more minutes. Stay with us.
We're all just trying to keep things running for those who rely on us. That's why we don't have time to be sick with the flu. And especially this year, no one has time to get sick. Get a flu shot for yourself and those around you too.
Welcome back. Sherry, thank you so much for sticking around for this segment. Wow, what a great discussion in the last segment. I guess, the next question I have is, are teachers afraid of teaching certain subject matters? And I know you talked about they're already pulling books off out of shelves in libraries. And what's happening?
Well, I've met with a lot of teachers, heard from a lot of teachers, especially our media specialists, or librarians is what we've called them in the past. I went to one school and this librarian had all the books out. He was trying to read everything that the parents were questioning. He's like, I feel like if the parents are going to question certain things, I want to say, I have read this book, it's okay to be on the shelves. So we're seeing a lot of that going on. We've seen a lot of librarians are questioning media specialists, like what, the parents are asking about certain books. I think we're missing a big word here, age-appropriate books.
Exactly.
Like what is age appropriate for high school would not be age appropriate for an elementary school. But we've seen a lot of this show up at school board meetings. We've seen the book banning. We've seen a lot of misinformation, you know, that they think teachers are requiring certain books to be, and that's just not the case. So I think there is a lot of mistrust in our communities right now, and unfortunately it's being thrown on teachers that we don't trust what you're doing, or we don't think you're, you know, we think you're brainwashing, or we are grooming, or we are doing all these things that just really aren't happening in our schools. And
Derry, I have a question. Do you
Yes.
think South Carolina is going to lose more teachers because of all the lawsuits?
yes, I think, well, the lawsuits that have come out have been against school boards. So anytime there's disruption at a school board, we've seen school boards go in and fire superintendents their first day on the job.
Wow.
We've seen other school districts dismiss superintendent of the year. So we see a lot of, let's say, disruptive behavior at school board meetings right now. And our school board folks are elected and they serve, and I don't think they signed up to get into all this kind of
Right.
turmoil.
Wow.
So anytime you have disruption at a school board level, if you don't feel like you're working in a stable environment, teachers will leave and move to a different district. And that's one of the things they're asking now is, well, how stable is that school board? Who got elected to the school board?
Wow.
Are they gonna fire the superintendent, and are they gonna fire my principal, and are they gonna fire, and that will trickle down into teacher transfers. That will trickle down into, there's a teacher's market right now. You can look around, and so if you're a stable school district with a stable superintendent and a stable, proactive, pro-public ed school board, you'll probably not get hit as hard as some of the dysfunctional places that we're seeing, where there's a lot of turnover right now and a lot of, I'll say a lot of political posturing going on with some parties with our school boards. So I do think it will have an impact on our teachers, and maybe they'll just leave one district and go to another district. But anytime a child experiences any type of disruptive instance in their day versus a teacher, school board, then it hurts our children and it hurts the learning process.
Well, I tell you, this is a topic that I know we're going to be discussing a lot, particularly as I mentioned earlier, because the legislative process is getting ready to get underway. And I'm certain that there'll be lots of bills filed about this topic, and the disruption that it will cause, the chaos that it will cause, is not of benefit to our students. But I really thank you, Sherry, as president of the South Carolina Education Association, for all the work that you do, for the advocacy and the activism that you all have done to protect and to serve the students and the public school system in South Carolina. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for covering this important topic, and I hope all the parents and teachers out there listening will work together, because we are stronger together and we need to all come together for what's best for our children.
That is very well said. And believe it or not, y'all, that completes our show today. We hope that you've enjoyed it. Sherry,
Yes,
again, thank you, and that you learned something that both empowers you and inspires you. So until the next time.